Good afternoon. Thanks all for coming. My name's Claire Blaustein. I am a senior experience designer at Publicis Sapient. I am a former content strategist / IA, so I have some identity issues and I'm really looking forward to the keynote this afternoon. But I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about creating living editorial style guides for Agile projects. So I am a longtime fan of editorial style guides. I've written a few and revamped them in past jobs over my career. But when I started on my first really agile project earlier this year, I didn't feel like there was any space for something like a style guide because I got really spooked by the idea of working software over comprehensive documentation, because what is a style guide except for comprehensive documentation? But as the project went on, I realized that the reasons I would need one were the same whether the project was agile or not. It was just that the style guide had to take a different form and had to be agile itself. So why do you need a style guide? For the same reason that you want truth in your presentations. It's that consistency is the key principle of any good user experience. And in this case, a good style guide is a tool to ensure thoughtful consistency. And that's because a good style guide, like a really good one, is not just a list of rules, but it contains the explanations for why we use language the way that we do. So I'm going to talk about this in terms of a project. The project I was working on, which was called the Cancer Moonshot Biobank. And this is a 5-year research study where they're asking people with cancer to donate blood or tissue samples over the course of their treatment. And part of that is making sure that those people understand how important their contributions are to cancer research, because researchers can't understand how cancer changes unless they have samples to work with. So our part of this was a public-facing website, which was only about 9 pages, so a pretty compact platform, and then a logged-in portal for the patients, for their physicians, and then also for research coordinators. So one of the things that was really great coming into this project was that they had a really robust content development process already in place. It started out with creative briefs and stakeholder interviews, so the content was very focused on meeting a user need from the get-go. Then the content was being developed within the design. This was new for me. I'm more familiar with working with existing content management systems, so the chance for us to build the content within the framework of the site meant that we were really seeing how the whole thing would come together organically. And it also stopped some of that, like, oh, we can just put one more paragraph in at the end, it's fine. Because if the page is this long, they know it's going to be this long. And then the other side of that was being able to do usability testing with the prototype really early on. Because it was filled with the real content, we could test it with people and see if what we had written and the way we'd written it resonated with them, if it made sense. So that all sounds awesome, and I know you're all really excited to do this project, but you know, every project has its challenges, and in this case, I was the challenge. I was coming onto the project midstream, so a lot of the content had been created, but it wasn't finalized yet, and I hadn't been there for any of the content conversations I would have liked to have been. I wasn't there for discovery. I wasn't there to know kind of how they were thinking about this, so I had a lot of catching up to do. Some other challenges were that while doing it in the prototypes is great, we were getting into a little bit of iteration swirl, and it was a large group of clients who were all content producers. So we were starting to churn on the same page over and over and over again, getting into a place where InVision comments were on top of InVision comments on top of that, which meant that we were actually delaying development because they couldn't finalize content because it was final V57 at this point. And it was also driving me insane, which wasn't super helpful either. So we needed some help. We needed something that could sit at the center of this process and be a source of truth, because they were starting to contradict themselves. Decisions that they had made weeks before, they either didn't remember that they had made them, or they're changing their mind because a new voice is coming into it. So we needed something. So at this point, enter the Living Editorial Style Guide, which is the thing I'm going to be talking about mostly today. And so any editorial style guide is a source of rules for how we talk about things, and then making it alive just means that the form changed a little bit. So this is my one GIF. I know my GIF game is not strong, but Blaustein, Frankenstein, whole thing. So to make a style guide alive, it needs to be 3 things. It needs to be collaborative, it needs to be generated based on need, and it needs to grow with the project. And there are some aspects to how you build it that will make this a little bit easier. So the first one is to keep it open. So picking a platform that is easy for everyone to access and update. In our case, it was Box Notes, because that's what we had. Google Docs, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. Though the lower fidelity, the better, because once you get into Word documents and especially into PDFs, people are going to treat this as a fixed object. And that's not really what it is. It's going to keep changing as the project changes. The second thing is to have a champion. So everyone needs visibility, but it's really helpful to have one person who's keeping this object top of mind as everything else is happening. So in that case, it was a small project, not a lot of people, that was me. But if you had a bigger project and more people involved in the content development process, it can be helpful to have multiple people's voices in. You just have to set aside some time to make sure everyone is always on the same page with what you've decided. So once you have those things, then it's time to let it grow. If you're coming in with it with some content already established, repetition is really helpful, because if you see something multiple times, there may need to be a rule around it. But really, where it's most useful is as a document for documenting discussion. So the things that you're talking about during content creation need a place to live so that we can go back and reference them later. So what are you looking for either repetition or discussion? There are some style guide usual suspects. So style choices, obviously, things like capitalization. Do you use sentence case or title case in your headers? Punctuation, so you can have the Oxford comma debate, it's fine. You should use it, but that's fine. Formality, thank you. Formality, so maybe in your branding discussions you've decided where you are on the spectrum of formal, but that has style implications. So do you use contractions or don't you? Do you use certain terms or not? And then there's word choices. So the biggest one is always, how do you refer to the thing, the product, whatever it is? How do you refer to yourself, and how do you refer to your users? And a lot of time for the last two, it's, we and you, we use that language on purpose because it connects us to the people we're talking to. But sometimes you have more than one person you're talking about, and wanting to use that terminology consistently is going to help make it for a better experience. And then there's technical vocabulary, which isn't quite, I think, the right word for it, but I was struggling to think of a better one. But when you're working with subject matter experts, which in my case were cancer researchers who are a ton smarter than I am and know a lot more about this, they use words in particular ways that have certain meanings. And it doesn't mean they have to actually be technical words. It can be very simple words, but that they've just put an entire world of meaning into, which you have no visibility into, and probably no one else does either. So if you don't get it, probably no one else will get it. So having those conversations to understand what they really mean when they say something means that you can propose a user-friendly equivalent, but that actually gets across the same meaning. So that all sounds like a ton, I know, but it's still Agile, so we get an MVP, hooray! So the first time you take something from a Post-it note on your desk and put it in a shared platform, you have a style guide. That's all you need. And I went back in our versioning, because nice thing about some of these Box Notes and Google Docs is you can go back and look, and this was where we started. So the first draft had 3 things in it. One of them was the name of the program. So the first time we said Cancer Moonshot Biobank. After that, because the first time and the subsequent times often are different, we used the Biobank because we didn't want to use acronyms, and it was a nice chance to get away from that. And then there was another rule about not using the word program because it had some meanings that they weren't sure they wanted to get into, and we liked the specificity of Biobank, so we wanted to give something not to do. Coming and going was another one, because even in 9 pages and change, there were already so many variations on how we talked about either coming into the program or leaving the program. So there were at least 6 different versions of each already propagated. So we condensed them down. So joining, enrolling, signing up, participating all became join, and then we had unenrolling, leaving. I think there was one that was had some kind of complicated, withdrawing one's samples from the project. And no, we're just going to deal with leaving. And then the last one is can versus may. And this was one of those ones where imbued meaning was kind of important, because there was a page that was using both, and it was using them what I thought was mostly interchangeably. So I was like, okay, let's just go with can. It's fine. It's less formal. It feels nice. That's great. But they wanted to use may in a particular way because may to them, and I understand this now, implies multiple possible outcomes. So they didn't want to use can when talking about research and its results or treatment because you can't guarantee that something can do something. You say it might do it or it may do it, and so we settled on may, and that's how we used those going forward. So the last thing I'll mention as far as structure, and this is because, again, it's a lot of work, to put something, or it can feel like a lot of work when you're thinking about it down the line, but really this is something that grows alongside the product. But something else that's helpful is to have a backlog. So you have a place dedicated in your document, and it's literally just a header at the bottom, where you put two kinds of things. Ones are the ones where it's like, we had a conversation about this, but I don't know if it's ever going to come up again, and it may not be important, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on it right now, but I want to have it here just in case. And then the second bucket is things you know you need to deal with, but just don't have time for. So the backlog works the same way as it does in a project. You go back to it on regular and see how you can deal with these things and put them into the flow of your project so that as the project goes on, the style guide continues to grow and change and adapt. And then at the end, you have a fully fleshed out thing that you can rely on. So this is what I think of, and I love these. I love Chicago. It's great. It's a wonderful tome of information, and my architect brain is so happy for cross-index numerical systems. It's awesome. But this is not the only way to do a style guide. And if you're doing it just this way, then you're limiting yourself of thinking of how it can be a really useful tool in an Agile project where we can actually move faster. We can be more consistent, we can engender more truth because we are providing a good user experience. And it just means that the style guide itself has to be Agile as well as the project. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and have a wonderful afternoon.